자, 오늘의 필독 문헌 다 읽었죠? I'm pretty sure you did have a look at today's core reading and sure that you had a lot of fun reading it, right? Alexis, right? Yeah. Okay, before we get into that, let me, as usual, give you a short explanation or lecture about what we talked about last week, all right, previously. Right. Previously, in the last week seminar meeting or class meeting, we were discussing constructivism and international relations, right? And Renata Sangi gave a fantastic presentation, as far as I'm concerned, about constructivism in relation to the study of international relations, right? And these are the 4 actual questions that you talk and thought hard about when you carried out group discussions, right? So the key assumptions and arguments of constructivism and anarchy is what states make of it is a famous phrase made by Alex Wendt. And what does this mean to you? The second question was which theoretical thoughts are more important or more appropriate to understand international relations or foreign policy behavior among these 3 theoretical perspectives. And also, how can we resolve the ongoing territorial disputes in the region of Northeast Asia, right? And this is also the same question that you need to think about for assignment, right? So by 27th of October, you need to post your short, maybe summary note or your assignment to the website. And strength and weakness of constructivism. Okay. So here are some a few key points regarding constructivism. Okay. First, just like the other 2 theoretical perspectives we've learned so far, including realism and liberalism, constructivism too is less a theory of international relations. Okay, it is more like perspective, and it is more like broader social theory of perspective, which then informs us how we could approach the study of international relations events or international relations phenomena, including security, governance, and foreign policy behavior, right? And as you know by now, constructivism has become prominent or one of the major theoretical approaches to the study of international politics since its emergence or inception back in 1980s, right? So obviously before 1980s, there were some constructivist or constructivism related concepts and ideas in the field of social sciences. Nevertheless, they were like sporadic. Okay, so in the field of international relations, constructivism or its idea has become more sophisticated and more elaborated, right? And so it has become more systematic theoretical thinking in the field of international relations since the end of Cold War, okay, since the 1980s. Right? And constructivism is a term coined by first Nicholas Onuff, okay, in his book entitled World of Our Making, okay, published in 1989. And then Alex Wendt published an article entitled Anarchy is What States Make of It, right? And then later published a book called Social Theory of International Politics back in 1999, both of which have advanced constructivist thinking in IR and making one of the major theoretical perspectives in the discipline. Okay, so here, if you take a close look at the titles of the book or the article, then I'm pretty sure you can make sense of what constructivism is, all about, right? So just take a look at the first, the title of the book, written by Onuff, World of Our Making. So here the emphasis is placed on where, the emphasis is placed on of our making rather than the word itself, right? So here, the title simply suggests or implies that word is not something that is just naturally given, exogenously given, right? It is something that we build, right? That we construct out of our understandings of relationship, right? So same thing, much the same thing can be said about the anarchy, right? In the title of the article written by Alex Wendt, right? So anarchy is not just given exogenously given reality. It is more like something that states or we make depending on how we understand them, how we interact with each other, right? So we can see the ideas or our understandings or our collective understandings are very crucial or central to the constructivist thinking in the field of international relations. Just by the looking at the titles of these two groundbreaking researches, right? Okay, let me play a very short video clip that explains constructivism in a very interesting way. Okay, this is a talk given by Professor Gallimore. 1분 13초. 이것 때문일까?
So think about this. If everybody woke up tomorrow morning and we just know the rules that the world is constantly the ways in themselves framed by.
Okay, here we go.
Well, constructivists want to see the world as something that we build out of the way we relate to each other. So think about this. If everybody woke up tomorrow morning and we decided that the United States just doesn't exist, well, it doesn't exist anymore. Because what makes up the United States isn't, the buildings and the bombs and the votes. It's everybody thinking that those things make up the United States. And that we agree that we act and we treat each other as if the United States is there. And it's all of that agreement and all of those beliefs and ideas that give us the United States. And so for a constructivist, the same thing applies to the whole rest of social life, and that includes international relations.
So here he is emphasizing the role, function of the ideas, right? Even in the realm of international relations.
You just can't have international politics unless you have a set of ideas.
Right? You catch it, right? We cannot have international relations unless we have a set of ideas about what states are or whether there are states exist in the first place. So we need to have a set of ideas, basically, in order for us to have international relations. That is what he is talking. Right?
You have to have a set of ideas about there are states. States have foreign policies. When I want to talk to a state, I go talk to the head of the state. I don't just talk to a random person from that state. You have an idea that there are authority structures, there are legitimate governments, and that's how you carry out international relations. And the interesting part for a lot of constructivists is, the sort of question of how much of that belief structure do you have to share before you can have international relations at all. So, you can imagine, some alien comes down from Mars and doesn't share any of our belief structures, has no idea what states are. You couldn't establish diplomatic relations with Mars if the alien doesn't even know what a state is.
Right? 이해했다. 재미있는, very, very interesting analogy, I guess, right? So we cannot basically have a diplomatic relations with what? With Mars, right? Simply because the aliens from Mars do not have a set of ideas about what we have, maybe the states or the diplomacy or the government. They do not have set of ideas about government, about states or diplomacy. Okay, that's why we cannot have diplomatic relations with the aliens from Mars.
So a lot of questions that constructivists ask take place at much longer time scales than questions that realists or liberals might ask. So, whereas a realist might ask, okay, what would have been the best way for a state to maximize its security in the 1600s? A constructivist would ask, what made people think there were states in the 1600s? You know, I had the example of, you know, if everybody woke up tomorrow and decided the US didn't exist anymore, right? The end of the Cold War, that was kind of what happened to the USSR. Is people got up one day and they started thinking that maybe this shouldn't exist anymore. And so this, you know, or people, actually what happens is people get up one day and they decide that maybe it's not that important that that wall's there. And they start going through the wall. And then the soldiers that are guarding the wall decide, well, maybe it's not that important that I shoot these people when they go through the wall. And then it goes from there, and the government starts deciding, well, all right, maybe it's not that important that we keep these people out of the wall.
So now he's talking about what? He's talking about 뭐라고? 그렇지, 그렇지. The collapse of the Soviet Union or the Berlin Wall, right? And the reason why he believes that the Soviet Union collapse or the collapse of the Berlin Wall is because, according to his notion or thinking, is, you know, we collectively believe that it is not important anymore for us to keep the wall intact, right? So again, he emphasizes the importance of the ideas or collective understanding of people or shared by people, right?
And then it continues and people start deciding, well, maybe it's not that important that we're part of the USSR anymore. And, you know, very, very rapidly, this whole house of cards disintegrates. And there's all sorts of reasons why. There were economic problems, there were political issues, and this should not at all be taken to think that there weren't. But at the end of the day, the USSR would have kept going until everybody decided it was time to stop. And, you know, 1989 to 1991, they decided it was time to stop. And it stopped. You know, all of these things that you take as being natural and given just because they're habitual, you have to be able to realize could be some other way. And
this is a key point, right? This is a key point. So everything, all of these things that might be seen as, you know, something natural, something given, you have to realize, you have to be able to realize that there could be something or some other ways, or some other ways.
Or at some level the choice is arbitrary. At some level, you know, what we do, that red means stop, is a random choice. Could have been green, could have been yellow, could have been purple. And there's so much of the way we live everyday life that's like that. Because if we had to stop and think about those things all the time, our brains would explode. You know, you have to kind of make your brain explode a little bit.
Yes. I agree. Okay. So as you can see, right, in this video clip, constructivist scholars basically argue that ideational factors, like ideas, right, and ideas about who we are. 미안해. 그래, 아이디어가 중요한데 말이야. The ideas, right? Ideas about who you are. That's identity, right? National identity. Ideas about what appropriate behaviors are. That is norms, right? So basically, ideas or ideation factors, which are obviously socially, right? Socially and historically formed and constructed, are central. central to international relations and the state foreign policy behavior for that matter, because such ideational factors like ideas and identities and norms define and even constitute who we are, who our friends or enemies are, and what our core values are, and therefore what our national interests are, right? So in the study of international relations, everyone is talking about national interest, right? We have to pursue national interest. But the question here is, according to constructivist thinking, is what national interests are, right? And national interests typically are defined socially and historically depending on our ideas, shared understandings, and norms, right? So national interests defined in the way of defining national identity affect how states behave toward other states. So let's take, let me give you an example, quite simple but powerful example here. National security, all right? It normally or generally refers to this, okay? The alleviation or non-existence of threats, okay, to states' cherished values. Non-existence or no existence of threats to states' cherished values, right? But the important question here is this, right? What are cherished values, and where do threats come from? Okay. So before we talk about or before we pursue any specific national security strategy or strategy to ensure or enhance national security, we need to decide what cherished values are for us. We need to decide, where threats mostly come from against our core values, right? We have to first decide these two questions before we decide how we act, right, in order to ensure our security. But for realists, answers to these questions are very simple and obvious and straightforward, right? So cherished value, what are cherished values from realist perspective? 소중한 가치가 뭐예요? From the realist perspective. Yeah, safety or, in other words, domination, safety, security. Yes, who said that? Yes, security. Survival, right? Basically survival. Because of what? Because of we are living in anarchy international system. No one can guarantee our survival. No one can resolve any conflict whatsoever between and among states in a peaceful manner. So, cherished values from the realist perspective are survival and maximizing power and so on and so forth, right? As you just pointed out. And then threats, where threats come from the realist perspective then. Yeah, other nation, more specifically, nations that have more power than us, right? More powerful than our nations, or have a very hostile intentions as well as very offensive military capabilities, right? So basically, threats come from stronger or more powerful states than my nation, right? So simple as that, very simple. But from the constructivist perspective, answers to these questions vary in different contexts, okay? For example, states can designate other stronger states, right? Even though they have more power, more offensive capabilities, we could regard them as friend, okay, as well as an enemy or threat, okay, and then approach them as such on the basis of how we define us, how we define our values, and how we define or how we understand them, right? So our understanding, our ideas here do matter, right? So national identity, the conceptions of who we are, what our values are, encourage or even determine, according to a few or some constructivist, very strong constructivist scholars, particular way of thinking about where threats to those values, our cherished values, might come from, and this affect obviously how the threats should be dealt with, right? And another example, okay, let's take another example, nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons. It is, we know that it is weapons that has, that is capable of killing hundreds of thousands of people at once, right? It is a weapons of mass destruction. But as we know, the same nuclear weapons do have different meanings, right? Different meanings depending on, first, how we think about nuclear weapons themselves, and second, more importantly, how we think about who possesses them, right? So depending on our understanding and our ideas, we act very, very differently toward even the same nuclear weapons. And one of the frequently quoted or cited example here is the comparison between North Korea's nuclear weapons and the United States or Britain's, right? So we feel very threatened by North Korean nuclear weapons and its nuclear weapons program, its nuclear weapons test, whereas we do not feel threatened at all, right, by, say, British or French or United States nuclear weapon or weaponry systems. As a matter of fact, quite the opposite is the case, right? We feel safe, right? We feel safe by the fact that the United States have nuclear weapons, right? We even feel like we are under the protection of American nuclear umbrella, so-called in Korean 해구산, 맞죠? We feel very safe. So by the same weapons of mass destruction, which has the same material capable of killing hundreds of thousands of people at once, we act very, very differently, right? Depending on our collective understanding and thinking. So the point is how we define or understand ourselves and others and the situations, and whether such an understanding is shared, that is a collective understanding and collective meanings, do matter when it comes to international relations, right? So a state national identity is shared understanding defines the contents, that's important, contents of that state's interests, okay? Like I said in the beginning, at the outset of the class today, national interests are not just given, right? It is something that we make. So the contents of states' national interests, of course, vary substantially depending on how we think what we should value, right? And therefore, it will affect how we understand, will affect the way we will act in global politics. The final example here is anarchy. Okay, anarchy. So according to realism and liberalism as well, to some extent, anarchy does imply only one thing, right? What is it? Anarchy means yes, great, yeah, conflict, right? Conflict. Because of security dilemma, because of mutual distrust, because of uncertainty, it means conflict or conflictual relationship, right? Relationship. But as you can imagine, as you can expect, right? Constructivist perspective, from the constructivist perspective, anarchy is not constant across all relationships and issue areas of international relations, right? A more important issue here is, according to constructivism, okay, how anarchy is understood. How anarchy is understood rather than anarchy in itself. Okay? Therefore, conflict or security dilemma is not an inevitable feature or characteristic of global politics produced by anarchy. According to constructivism, right? Instead, constructivist scholars believe that it should be viewed as just one of the several natures underlining international politics rather than timeless reality, okay? It implies many things rather than just one only conflictual thing, right? So anarchy in this view, right, view in this light, anarchy can have multiple meanings, right? So it could have, we could have conflictual international anarchic system, but also we could have competitive anarchy international system, right? And also we could have cooperative anarchy international system, right? So we could, not could, but we do and will have conflicts, competitions, and cooperation under the same anarchy, right? So, or in Alex Ventis' term, we have Hobbesian, right, international system. We have Lockean, we have Kantian international system. And these different meanings are determined by ideational factors, right? Social, cultural, historical factors, not just anarchy itself, right? That's the key point. That's the key point. And aside from identity ideas, the most prominent ideational factor or dimension of world politics accepted by constructivists is the role of norms. Okay, it is also ideas, collective ideas about what appropriate behaviors are, right? So norms basically define as shared expectation or shared ideas about appropriate or legitimate behavior by actors within a particular society. Right? So international norms means that what legitimate or appropriate behavior to be taken by state actors, right? State actors. So constructivists pay very close and attention to the discourses in a state because discourse reflects and even shape the social beliefs and establish and affects accepted norms of that state behavior. Right? So let me give you a very interesting, simple example here. We often give up our seats when we travel by, right? Subway to old people. I'm not sure whether European people often give up their seats when they travel. They do. Okay, they do great. Okay, yeah. All right, good. Then what about? But as far as I'm concerned, British. Okay, Brits, the people in the Britain do not give up their seats to old people, right? They don't. Because I do know. Okay, I used to live there. But anyway, South Korean as well as you guys, okay, give up our seats to old people. The question is why, right? Why? Why do we Why are we willing to give up our precious seats to old people when we travel by the subway? That is not because, that is not because of power, right? That is not because the old people more powerful than us, they could threaten us. No, that's not the truth, right? We are physically or materially more powerful than old people, right? That's the truth. So that is not because of power, and also that is not because of the economic benefits or gain, right? We could not or we will not have any money or payment by giving up our seats to all people. So it is not related to economic liberalism. And it is not because of power, so it is not related to, roughly speaking, realism, right? And also there is no such thing as law or institution that order us to give our seats to all people, right? There's no law that governs that behavior, right? So it is also not about neoliberal institutionalism. So it is not about institution or law. It is not about economic benefits. It is not about power. But it is about appropriate behavior. We think that it is appropriate to give our seats to all people, so we do so, right? So ideas or collective ideas understanding does affect our very actual behavior in our society, right? So that's how powerful, that shows how powerful norms or shared understanding and shared expectations are, So, in summary, constructivism argues or places very great emphasis on the role of norms, identities, and ideas, right? And they are socially and historically constructed. Therefore, the contents of the national interest or the meanings of anarchy even vary in different social and historical contexts. And this implies anarchy, as I said, can have multiple meanings or cultures. So anarchy need not lead to self-help necessarily, right? And of course, as I said, all states, we all want to be safe and we want to survive. But that does not mean that we always pursue power maximizing strategy, right? Some states pursue power maximizing strategy, whereas some others don't, right? So how states or nation states understand each other or define the situation in which they live, or whether and such understanding is shared, most important factor of international relations and state behavior. 다 알겠죠? 쉽지? Okay. 이거 difference, big difference among these three major theoretical perspectives. As you know, the first two, realism and liberalism, tend to focus on material dimension of international politics, right? They focus on power relations, right? Distribution of power, balance of power, and liberalism focus on international trade, international organization, and institutions. But constructivism focuses on the ideational factors, like I said. Okay, so with that in mind, let's compare the three theoretical perspectives with the concept of power and anarchy. Okay, first, liberalism and realism. Anarchy is just a given reality. It is unchangeable constraint on states' foreign policy behavior. So according to realism, we could say something like this. Okay, cooperation is difficult to be achieved because of anarchy. Right? Because of anarchy. But despite of anarchy, cooperation is possible and could be even persistent according to liberalist thinking. Right? There are many ways of ordering anarchy from the liberalist perspective. Right? Institution can reduce uncertainty or cost of the agreements and so on and so forth. So the anarchy is just a given reality here, right? That because of anarchy, blah blah blah, because of anarchy, right? Or despite of anarchy, blah blah blah. So anarchy is just a given thing, or something natural or naturally given, right? But constructivism states that anarchy is, what states make of it, and therefore it is changeable and does have multiple meanings. So under anarchy, we could have both competition, cooperation, and conflicts. And depending on how anarchy is understood, right? And how about power? Okay, according to or from the realist perspective, power is the most important factor. And of course, here, power is defined in terms of material capability, right? Like the military capability, military spending, and economic outputs. The something tangible, right? Something materialistic, tangible. So from the realist perspective, power is the most important factor of international relations and foreign policy behavior. It's all about power. From the liberalist perspective, however, power is important. Okay, material power, material capability of states are very important, but they are exercised within the framework of institution and rules. Right? So there is a slight difference between realism and liberalism. Okay, both perspectives take power as one of the most important factor. However, constructivism might say something like this. Okay, power has multiple meanings, right? And one of the meaning of the power can be important when society or when state actors share understanding that that kind of power is important. For example, we do have soft power, we do have hard power, we do have maybe smart power, whatever, right? There are many different kinds of power, and if a smart power or if soft power is important, that is because we as collectives believe that it is important. Okay? But from the realist perspective, power understood in terms of the material capability is always important. Okay? So you see the clear differences among these three major theoretical perspectives. 그렇죠? So, okay, based on our understanding of these three theoretical perspectives, today we will do this theory, test, and application. And like I said, I believe that you had you had a lot of fun reading this article, Aaron Friedberg's, The Future of U.S.-China Relations. Okay, is conflict inevitable? And these are some of the questions that you need to think about today. Okay. 아까 얘기한 것처럼 today we will focus on theory, test, and application with mainstream theoretical perspectives we've discussed so far, right? Especially in relation to East Asia, with a focus on U.S.-China future relationships. Okay. So these are the, as you can see here, these are some of the questions that you need to consider today, okay? For example, how do mainstream IR theories predict the future of U.S.-China relations? And as you know, different theories present and make different predictions, and which one do you think is most, satisfying? Okay, satisfying. Also, although they are mainstream, so-called mainstream theories, they do have shortcomings, especially when it comes to comprehending, understanding East Asian international politics. So what kinds of shortcomings or limitations do they have, right? And if so, if there are any limitation or shortcomings, how to improve them, how to correct them. And finally, this is a very difficult question, but if we have time, then we will talk about whether we need a whole new theory of international relations, or at least for understanding of international relations in East Asia. Okay, and Bina Alexis will give a talk on theory, test, and application based on Aaron Friedberg's very interesting and to some extent complicated paper. Right? I did have a look at presentation file. It was very, very good. Okay, let's get started.
Hi guys, we are this is our presentation, but we are really nervous because this is not familiar to me. Presentation with English, so please focus on us and our context. Yes, we are starting presentation with these orders. First, theory application in international relations and case study and critique of application and applying theory to North and South Korea relations. Because North and South Korea relations can be explained and analyzed with these theories, realism and liberalism like that. So, and you guys also have many different point of view and interesting topics. So that's why we pick this topic. And food for thought and last question and answer. First, theory application in international relations. Theories are often used to generalize the complex international system, while at the same time providing a basis for making predictions regarding future events and state behaviors. However, despite having a solid theoretical basis, oftentimes theorists either lack confidence when making predictions or fail to foresee certain events or actions. Even though most individuals align themselves more closely with one particular theory, it is critical to acknowledge the value of the others. The whole world and events to happen are too complex to conclude and analyze with only one certain theory. So sometimes this inflexible and or nothing attitude are not welcomed in international relations understanding. So often some theories just approach one certain theory. They often ignore other important factors. So acknowledge the value of the others are really important in understanding international relations. Yes, we have one case study, or the Cold War. The Cold War was an era where international relations theories thrived, especially realism and liberalism. Many existing theories, as well as new strands and types, dominated foreign policy literature. And theorists of all types closely observed the behaviors of the United States and Soviet Union, and they also attempted to predict the future with their own theory. However, many theorists failed to predict the end of the Cold War and collapse of the Soviet Union. Despite a number of theories being cited as the correct explanation of the relation between the two great powers, none were able to fully predict or reflect the true reality of the situation. Because there are lack of, as I said just before, there are really lack of other understanding and important factors. Even after careful observation and study, there is a significant difference between the theoretical and actual world of international relations. And from now on, we are approaching the future of the United States. United States is already hegemonic power on the world, and the rising new power country, China's relations. United States and China relations today seen as a parallel situation like United States and Soviet Union. The relation between these two great powers has a substantial effect on the international system as a whole. Many other states base their actions and behavior upon their relationship between the United States and China. There are many potential results and consequences, and negative and positive. So today we have analyzed and we study limitations of other theories. Okay, first, we analyze optimistic and pessimistic among realism and liberalism and constructivism point of view. In some way, this separation or three strengths, realism and liberalism and constructivism, shows the limitations of each theory to make concrete predictions, because the followers of the same general theory can use the same analytic tools, yet still come up with nearly directly opposing views and predictions. And from realism, we have two kinds of view: optimistic realism and pessimistic realism. So partly I say about optimistic realism and Alexis say about pessimistic realism. Optimistic realists say that China's power are limited because nowadays growth will likely slow in near future, and China cannot hope to reach the same level of United States, and they are also not trying to like that. And China has also limited aims. Not all rising powers show aggression. This is called as conservative power. And they has also limitations about security dilemma. First one is bipolar relationship, few possibilities of major change. Second one is geographic distance. Third one is differing spheres of influence, maritime power versus land power.
On the other hand, some realists look at this situation in a very pessimistic view and feel that it'll lead to conflict because they see China as just a rising power, and they don't believe that the rapid growth will slow down, and they feel that like with the increased economic growth there will be increased military capabilities, and then China will experience a shift in their aims and will want more and more in the international system because they view that rising powers in general are troublemakers in the international system because they try to assert themselves and act more aggressive because they want to change the balance of power and they want to keep growing. And so pessimistic realists think that China will likely follow this pattern and also start to assert themselves and challenge like boundaries and agreements and the hierarchy. And also pessimistic realism, like they look at the security dilemma as a really important factor because there's a lot of misinterpretation of intentions between the two great powers, especially in the case of Taiwan, because China might just be trying to prevent independence and the US might just be trying to prevent forceful reunification, but they might misinterpret these intentions as trying to start a war.
And second one is liberalism. Optimistic liberalists say that economic interdependence is really good between two states. As the trade between two states has increased, so economic interdependence can be really good in students as good peace between two states. And second one is international institutions. Nowadays, more than before, China has joining other institutions and like NGO. And third one is democratization. Optimistic liberalists has a positive thought about that China is already becoming democracy in their states, being by economic development, even not even politically, but economically they already has becoming democracy.
On the other hand, pessimistic liberals do agree that China might be becoming more like a democracy in terms of its economic openness, but it's seen as an authoritarian regime in transition, which means that it's neither fully democratic nor totalitarian, so it's more likely to initiate conflict because of this transition. So it's a difficult road towards becoming a democracy, and those in transition are more likely to initiate conflict. And on the other hand, the US is seen as a crusading liberal democracy because like democracies are prone to view non-democracies with suspicion, and their foreign policy towards those non-democracies are usually based upon that mistrust and suspicion. And also, in general, not all groups want a peaceful relation between US and China because some international organizations and groups within the countries benefit from tensions between the two. So in general, there's also just that natural tendency between them, and they might promote those suspicions to keep the tension there.
And third one is constructivism. Optimistic constructivist has that the point of view that China is increasing participation in international organizations. This leads to shifting strategic culture, like embracing more liberal norms, and interactions with the foreign counters are also increasing, and China already beginning to care about their identity in the international system because China wants to make a good image on the worldwide. So they are really sensitive to social incentive and fearful of appearing to be pariah on the world.
But there's also constructivists who say that the existing like mental constructs and like identities that countries already have of each other is very deeply rooted, and that it's very difficult to change those pre-existing ideas. So even though China might be trying to change its image, that it's going to be very slow at best, and that there's already like some suspicion on both sides because a lot of Americans view Chinese leadership as illegitimate and potentially dangerous, and they view the U.S. has a very positive self-image that they are just promoting democracy and defenders of freedom in Asia. So those conflicting identities could lead to conflict, and also just interactions can also, even though they might promote like a positive image, they might also just reinforce the negative image, especially considering that the US is often involved in China's like human rights policies, and when they try to make agreements on that, they're often unsuccessful, so then they have that just reinforced negative self-image. So in general, we like just a critique of how this the author divided this into pessimistic, optimistic for each one. Like the theories are very specific, and they look at just about one factor or a couple related factors that influence the relationship between the United States and China. But this also limits the ability of the theories to make accurate predictions and accurately reflect the situation because it's quite complex and involves a number of factors. So by focusing solely on one, it's very difficult to see this as an accurate representation. Also, by having the optimistic and pessimistic view, the validity of the theories is a little bit weakened because it shows that like the same analytic tools can be used to make completely opposing predictions, that you can use the same tools to either predict conflict or peace. So also the predictive capabilities are limited because it's impossible to know for certain which factor is going to be most important. So each theory has its idea which one's going to be, but there's no way to say for certain. So it's important to understand the limits of each theory and also look at the value found within the other theories. So in the text that we were reading, the future of U.S.-China relations, they proposed like the two sides that's either going to be peace and stability or conflict. But if you think of it in terms of the current situation, there's really no way to classify the situation because there is tension. It's not totally harmonious and peaceful, but at the same time, there's no direct conflict. So there was a lack of a clear prediction in the reading because each theory just had its own thought. But it did say that there's probability of a multi-factor result, that multiple factors are probably going to work together in the end to predict the future relations. So it's important to look at those multiple factors. So then our prediction about the future relations, we believe that it's going to be the continued lack of direct conflict. We don't believe that there's going to be an actual all-out war, but there's probably still going to be the sustained tensions that can be seen now, where it's not the totally peaceful and it's almost like an invisible war, that each one is trying to make gains and delegitimize the other. And through the symbolic power demonstrations that they often do, for example, the U.S. flying planes over the restricted no-flight zone, and trying to reestablish relations with neighboring countries, and just kind of showing that they don't really need the relationship with China, that they have others in the area, or they don't, China doesn't need the U.S., it has relations with Europe and Africa. So then we also decided to apply this logic of the theories to the relationship between North and South Korea, because it has a lot of parallels just on a smaller scale as the U.S. and China, because there's different regime types between the two, there's different levels of power, and there's also very negative identity and stereotypes against the other and their intentions. So then in North-South relations, for realism, the optimistic side would be that just like how China can't reach the level of the U.S., North Korea won't be able to reach the level of South Korea. So it's unlikely that there will be conflict. It'll just be a sustained relationship since it can't really assert itself as on the same level. But on the pessimistic side, since North Korea constantly pursues like nuclear capabilities, this will be seen as a threat, and it could fall into a security dilemma situation, which would result in conflict. But then, so from liberalism, the optimistic view is that in recent years, there's been a lot of international organizations related to North Korea and trying to open up to North Korea and engage them, which would have a positive effect and could lead to a peaceful resolution. And also, like, there's a lot of like capitalism in North Korea, like privately. There's a lot of like companies starting to try to like get in a little bit, so that could start to change the regime slowly. But on the pessimistic side, it's very unlikely that North Korea would ever become a democracy. And so the beginnings of any democratic ideas might just create even more backlash. And then it might just lead to conflict by trying to suppress all those ideas and those movements. So, and just the presence of having South Korea right there also might be seen as a threat to the regimes in terms of democracy and promoting those ideas. And finally, constructivism. For optimists, they like think that since North Korea, like organizations are trying to get in and trying to show that North Korea, like the situation isn't as bad as most people believe, and that the identity shouldn't be as negative as it is, there might be more nations willing to open up and willing to try to engage with North Korea, which would then promote more of a positive relationship. And also just the fact that in terms of identity, since it used to be one unified peninsula, that deep-rooted history might be able to promote some forms of peace in the future. But on the pessimistic side, North Korea already has a really bad negative identity and is seen as like one of the like worst actors in the international system. So it's unlikely that even if some openness is seen, that would really change that fundamental distrust and suspicion. So it'll be difficult for the nations to cooperate because of that. Okay. And then just our food for thought was like, do you agree with the author's separation of class and classification of the optimistic and pessimistic strands of each major theory? Or is there a different way that you feel would be better to divide these groups to more accurately reflect the situation? And also, just as there's no clear answer regarding the future of US-China, so too there's lack of predictable clarity with respect to North and South Korea. However, like, which theory do you believe is most applicable to that situation and most likely to have accurate predictions for the future? And last, in this like classification, they ignored other actors. They focused solely on US and China. But do you think that the role of any outside states should be considered? And how would that change the relationship between these two great powers? And thank you for listening to our presentation. Do you have any questions?
No one.
So, with all the views that you presented, which are all really interesting, I think we talked about it the other day, but what was the view that you stabilized yourself with more? Like,
For US and China or
Yeah.
North and South?
no, North and South Korea,
Okay.
US and China.
US and China. I guess we kind of looked at it more as like a multi-factor approach, because we saw like that a lot of different factors could influence a situation. So that's why we kind of think it's going to remain like as it is currently, that it's not really going to change too much unless like a major event happens to change the relationship. So all the theories kind of said that the relationship would change to either like peace and stability or conflict. But I guess for me, I usually look at constructivism since it's not as predictive as the other and just looks at more like the identity. Just because, like, especially US and China, like, the US views China pretty negatively in a lot of its foreign policy, and it's pretty suspicious of its motives. Like, anything China does, it's always analyzed, like, is this a threat? Is this not a threat? So.
Any other questions? Minya?
I'm just curious about when you guys were presenting about realism in limitations of security dilemma. I know it's the core reading said that America has maritime power and China has land power.
Yeah.
Do you agree with the author's view? Because I actually didn't look at like
Yeah.
why do you have to like define America's power as maritime and define China's as land power? I don't get it. Like,
I mean, I think they did that more because, like, I guess one saying that's really common in the U.S., especially after the Vietnam War, is like, don't start a land war with China. They just have too many people. So you can't, like, the U.S. would never send troops to China and try to engage it directly on land, but they might have some success if they kept it in the ocean, like outside. So that's just one of the, I guess, kind of like historic things that, like, I mean, even in school, we're taught like that it's just really not a good idea to try to start a land war with China.
How do you think like U.S. the future of U.S.-China relations, especially if the tensions grow, will affect the Korean Peninsula?
That's a good question. I don't know, like, because the U.S., especially in recent years, has been trying to make friends with all of it, like trying to improve their relationships with all. So that might come back to hurt them later, because if one relationship starts to disintegrate, others might as well, especially if others find like China to be an important, because it'll probably be really divided, because like it's right in the middle, so it would probably cause a lot of problems.
And it's mostly focused on China's role in this relationship. Like everything explains mostly about China. So do you think that in this relationship only China's behavior, attitudes is gonna play a role in this relationship?
I think,
Because it shows that
Yeah.
it only depends on China.
yeah, I think
Depending on how China behaves. But
Yeah.
this relationship is mutual.
it is mutual. So I think the reason they focus more on China, like the author focused specifically more on China, is because China is kind of going through that like transition, because kind of like the U.S. is kind of established in its position, like in some sense, it's kind of already that hegemonic power that has its established position. So since China's the one that's like the rising power, the new one on the scene, it's kind of the one that could affect the relationship more.
That's right, but on the other side, the United States, which then this role is kind of decreasing, and
Yeah.
they are not probably just not gonna look at that and let it go like that, right?
Yeah.
So their behavior might also change.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the U.S., does change its policies, but I think in some sense the United States is more of a reactionary power. They don't, like, they react to things and then it'll make policy. Like, so if China did something, the U.S. would react. They might not be the one to start something, but more of like react to it.
Because of the subject matter that today we will talk about the relationship or present and future relationship between Washington and Beijing, I think we will have a very interesting debate and as well as discussion, because the relationship between these two countries, or the so-called the rise of China, or the question like whether China can rise peacefully, has been subject of heated debate for some time in the field of international relations. And that questions, especially whether China can rise peacefully or not, is something that most of international relations scholars are concerned about, right, interested in. That's why I ask you to read this particular reading, although it's been quite some time. It was published when? 좀 됐죠? But anyway, let's do this. Okay. Okay. I like the fact that they provide us with their own critiques of the Aaron Friedberg's approach, right? The framework. Also, I really like the fact that they attempted to apply the theory application logic employed by Aaron Friedberg to the case of South and North Korea relationship, right? And they pointed out some limitations of the authors, the Aaron Friedberg's framework, right? So it was very informative presentation, I think. And like I said, we will be able to have very interesting debate, since this concerns the rise of China. So we have 4 questions, but today I'm gonna finish today's class meeting earlier than usual, right? 너네들 때문에. So let's do this quickly. You don't have to think about question number 4, right? Just try to do question 1, 2, 3 quickly, all right? Quickly. So the first question is this, okay? As you can see in the screen, the realism, liberalism, constructivism make different prediction about the future of U.S.-China relations. For example, what prediction about the question is, what prediction about the future relationship between these two countries made by realist pessimist based on what key evidence and key factors? I mean, this question gives you a chance to go over or summarize of the core readings, okay? So if you guys believe that you fully understand, you have fully understood the core readings, then just pass, okay? You don't have to discuss this question number 1, okay? Just pass. And instead focus on question number 2 and 3, okay? So different theories, as you just heard and read from the reading and from the presentation by Alexis and Bina. Different theories present different explanation and predictions, right? Even it is quite amazing for us to know that realism could make very contrasting predictions about the same phenomenon, right? The future relations of China and the United States, right? Although we often think that realism suggests us to believe that, you know, the conflicts would be inevitable, right? But the other way around could be also a thought, right, from the realist perspective as well. So different theories make different, very different predictions, and which one do you think is most satisfying, right? If you find none of the presentation or none of the predictions or none of the theories is satisfying, then is there a different way that more accurately reflects the situations, you know, the future of U.S.-China relations? This is the question that I borrow from today's presentations. And question number 3 is make your own predictions about the future of South Korea and Japan relations. Okay, South Korea and Japan relations based on, the mainstream, the 3 mainstream, realism, liberalism, and constructivism, in the same way that Adam Friedberg did. Right? Although it might have limitation, it has a limitation, as a matter of fact, but try to apply the same theory application or theoretically oriented predictions, the logic of theoretically oriented predictions employed by Friedberg to the case of South Korea and Japan relations, future relations. All right. And final questions. Mainstream theory is a satisfactory, especially when it comes to comprehending. If we do have time, then think about it. But focus on question number 1, 2, 3, and among them just 2 and 3. 알겠죠? 2, 3번에 집중해서 할 수 있도록 합시다. 오케이.